Now the judges will introduce themselves.
Good morning. My name is Miriam Memar-Sadeghi. I participated in We the People the first year it was offered on the bicentennial of the U.S. Constitution, and I've devoted a large portion of my career to civic education and civil society capacity building in Iran, where I'm originally from.
And hi, my name is Tandy McConnell. I was a professor of history at Columbia College in South Carolina for about 20 years. And right now I'm teaching high school social studies, about where you guys are right now.
My name is Michael DePiro, coming from beautiful Tallahassee, Florida. I work for the Florida Department of Education. Glad to be here and can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Could you all please introduce yourselves and also introduce your teacher?
Well, good morning, everyone. We are Unit 1 from Team Indiana, Hamilton Southeastern High School. My name is Preston Reynolds. I'm the Unit 1 captain. I'm planning on attending Wabash College with a double major in history and economics. Our teacher and assistant coach are Janet Chandler and Alana Kane.
Hello, I'm Kai Rexroth. I'm planning on attending Indiana University and I'll be majoring in accounting.
Good morning, judges. My name is Meredith McKenzie. I'll be attending University of Massachusetts and majoring in history.
Hello, I'm Luke Jim. I'll be attending Indiana University and have an undecided major.
Okay. Unit 1, what are the philosophical and historical foundations of the American political system? First question. The American War is over, but this is far from being the case with the American Revolution. It's a quote from Benjamin Rush. To what extent, if any, did revolutionary principles influence constitution making during the founding period? What problems, if any, does the principle of consent present when creating or amending constitutions? To what extent, if any, are revolutionary principles evident in modern times? Please begin.
Founder Thomas Jefferson stated,
What countries can preserve its liberties if its rulers are not warned from time to time that their people preserve the spirit of resistance?
preservation of resistance and revolutionary principles described by Jefferson have been repeated throughout history and prevalent during the founding period of the United States.
More recently, events such as the storming of the United States Capitol illustrated this spirit of resistance. Principles such as consent of the governed and limited government influenced the writing of the Constitution to a great extent.
During the founding period, revolutionaries noticed fatal flaws in the British government and wanted to correct these when crafting their own form of government. Enlightenment thinker Baron de Montesquieu proposed separation and accountability between powers within a government and stated,
It is necessary from the very nature of things that power should be a check to power.
separation of powers and checks can be seen throughout the Constitution with the creation of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches.
Additionally, revolutionaries noticed a lack of checks on power within the British government. This absence in accountability led to the formation of state constitutions in places such as Massachusetts in an attempt to keep the power of the governing body in check. Revolutionary principles have impacted the way Americans view their democratic system and the documents that founded it.
These documents, chief amongst them the Constitution, limit United States government. Philosopher George Sabin paraphrased the Huguenot Vindicate contra Tyrannus as saying,
People lay down the conditions which the king is bound to fulfill. Hence they are bound to obedience only conditionally, namely upon receiving the protection of just and lawful government.
However, when amendments to the Constitution are created, it is not the citizens who dictate changes, it is government officials. Because of this, ratification and changes to the Constitution are not entirely representative of the consent of the governed. This is important as changes to the Constitution outline limitations upon those same government officials, effectively making them self-regulating.
In contrast, founders Madison and Hamilton would argue citizens elect officials who participate in civil discourse, justifying any changes to the Constitution agreed upon by elected officials as representing the consent of the governed. Regardless, it is an arduous process to ratify amendments in the Constitution, as Congress requires a 2/3 majority to pass an amendment, and with the aggressive political climate of the modern age, passing amendments is extremely difficult.
President Franklin Roosevelt stated,
Remember always that all of us, and you and I especially, are descended from immigrants and revolutionists.
The United States was built on revolutionary concepts such as the consent of the governed and limited government, which endured into the modern day to a great extent.
Limited government in the Revolutionary period was marked by the significance of the separation of powers. Balance has been reflected through Supreme Court decisions such as Bernie v. Flores. This ruled that the federal government's use of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act exceeded authority under the 14th Amendment.
Consent of the governed has similarly persevered into the modern day. Author Ayn Rand described the consent of the governed as,
The government is not the ruler, but the servant or agent of the citizens.
this concept has been advanced recently in relation to faithless electives in Shafalo v. Washington, which held the states have a right to enforce punishment unto electors acting against the popular majority in the casting of their electoral ballot. This advances the presence of citizens in the civic process, furthering their agency.
Despite revolutionary principles being present in contemporary government, it is important to remember the cautionary words of anti-federalist Mercy Otis Warren.
The progress of the American Revolution has been so rapid, and the principles which animated to the noblest exertions have nearly been annihilated.
This concludes our testimony. We are now ready for your questioning.
Okay, does our federal system help or hinder our ability to gauge the consent of the people? In your view, is civil disobedience consistent or inconsistent with your understanding of consent? How is consent related to representation within our constitutional system? Take any one of those that you prefer.
I would argue that our current federal system, in the words of Baruch Spinoza, does not illustrate the consent of the people well enough. Ideas such as civil disobedience are the best way for a citizen's active population to express their opinion without directly harming the government. However, current restrictions on civil disobedience in places such as Michigan or Minnesota or even New York that the states have outlined have all kind of restricted this power, which the citizens would usually have.
How so?
It's mostly in regards to COVID-19 lockdowns. The ability to petition and file a petition for a protest or for a rally has become much more difficult in these states. And while that is justified to a certain degree, many people do disagree with it for restricting the citizen's agency.
Additionally, going off the ideas of philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau and his ideas on the consent of the governed, he argued that a direct democracy is the best way to represent the entirety of the people in their consent. Rather, in the United States, we have a representative democracy rather than direct. So the argument could be made, well, are we representing the whole consent of the United States populace? So that argument can be made with direct democracy and representative democracy.
However, philosophers such as Plato would argue that a direct democracy leads to the tyranny of the majority, in which the majority oppresses the minority and results in the minority not having their voice being heard. This leads to implementations of the system such as the Electoral College, in which we ensure that those who might make up the minority, such as smaller states, still have their voice heard.
Was Plato really concerned about the tyranny of the majority, or was he more concerned about the good?
Plato himself was very concerned by the tyranny of the majority as well as the tyranny of the minority. His mentor and almost a father figure to him, Socrates, was implicated in a majority democratic plot in the city of Athens at the time. And that involvement made him almost an enemy of popular sovereignty for a good while. Even until his death, he always expressed that popular sovereignty is a dangerous form of governance.
Okay, Tandy?
Okay, thank you very much. You raised the issue of the Electoral College. It seems to me the Electoral College is perfectly designed to suppress the will of a majority. We've seen presidents over the last several decades be elected repeatedly without achieving a majority vote, a majority of the voice of the voting people. Based on simply the idea of popular sovereignty, should the Electoral College be abolished, and how should it be replaced?
From the perspective of Italian philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli, he argued that a country is truly free and governed properly if people have access to free institutions. By having an electoral college system in place, people don't have access to these governing institutions, which means it should be abolished because people truly don't have a voice or say in government, because we have seen that people with lesser votes or less of the popular vote have won recent elections. And with that, we could see a change in the system by implementing a system in which people truly have their voices heard. And maybe this just bases a system just purely upon the popular vote and rules out the electoral college in the long run.
In opposition to that opinion would be the words of Edmund Burke, where he advocates for reform of already existing institutions instead of some sort of demolition of it. While I don't completely agree with the Electoral College, I'd say measures such as faithless electors taken in Chafalo v. Washington are more apt to the common good of the people overall in comparison to just getting rid of institutions that are already existing.
Additionally, it must be considered that during the founding period of the United States, the Electoral College was put in place in fear of the uneducated going to make decisions that they didn't deem that was going to benefit the country. As we know, education is a requirement for most in the United States, so the argument can be made that while we're educated, should popular sovereignty be the more determining factor? So that can be seen today.
So are you arguing then that only educated people should be permitted to vote and that a majority of uneducated people should be denied full access to political power?
I wouldn't say that statement would be apt to the United States today. The argument that we more go forward with is the fact that even though the founders were scared of an uneducated populace ruling over this tyranny of the majority, that complete proposition has been proven false both by sociologists and the educational progression of the United States. So any sort of argument that people are not smart enough for their own good is completely moot.
Thank you.
So keeping on the Electoral College question, how would, if the Electoral College was to be reformed, how would the Electoral College being reformed or taken away still reflect the consent of that state as a whole rather than at the national level? So what I'm trying to ask is, how does the Electoral College protect the state in a national election, giving the consent to the state? Or I could change it and reframe it and say, does the Electoral College protect the state's consent in a national election?
Yes, in a national election, the Electoral College does protect the state's idea of consent, especially when it comes to the smaller voices of certain states. With that, the system that was designed was to give equal voice to states so that everyone had a say in government. And while in this current system, we see the idea of populations growing in certain states and shrinking in other states, states still have this power and giving consent to the federal government because they have an active role to play. And this role is by having electors vote on their behalf, which shows that they truly do play a role in who is president, rather than having a system that would ignore the needs if the Electoral College was ruled out.
I agree with my colleague.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I would agree with my colleague on this point. I would supply the words of John Stuart Mill, who stated that while all should have a voice, that voice might not be entirely equal. And for the sake of having our states able to participate all at an equal level, oftentimes we mitigate the voice of those in more populated states in the Electoral College to ensure that that system remains balanced.
Well, with the last minute, does anybody else want to add on to that? I'm not going to ask the follow-up question.
I would just state the words of Immanuel Kant, where in order to guarantee the autonomy and agency of the citizen, their rights and freedoms have to be protected overall. The Electoral College in its current form is not protecting the voting rights and the overall rights of the entire populace of the United States. When a vote in, for example, Wyoming is worth 2.5 in California, that just isn't properly representing people or their autonomy in general.
As part of consent, though, isn't, okay, all right, great, thank you. I think you guys did an excellent job of being able to maneuver and move around. The 3 follow-up questions were different, and we didn't keep you all in the same place, and you were able to be agile and move around and work together well as a team. I appreciated, Luke, that you were able to bring in ancient philosophy, and it's in a way that was very relevant. You brought in very contemporary examples, particularly COVID and the restrictions that has placed on the ability to provide consent, which sometimes has to be through protest. And so you have a lot to be proud of, and it's a pleasure to be with you.
I'll second that. It was a wonderful conversation. You showed a great mastery of the details. You came up with Supreme Court cases. You came up with a very appropriate quotation, Spinoza and Rousseau, that I would not have thought of. I would not have thought of at all in that context. But you made them. You made them work. And rarely do we find Machiavelli quoted approvingly in support of freedom, which I thought was a very compelling way to support your argument. So overall, I very much enjoyed this conversation. Thanks so much.
I echo my colleagues, and I'll add on two things. In the positive, really enjoyed how they were your arguments, but they're your arguments through the voices of the people who established what we're aiming at today. So I think that was great. One logistical critique, and you're here for a reason, so this is just me with my processing. I love the seamless transition from how you did your statement. But with some of you, if you would just pause for a second between seamless, because I found it difficult to follow the train of thought then without that. But again, that was very well rehearsed, and that's not a negative on anything on the scoring. It's just for processing that. For me, it was a little bit more difficult on some of that. So I'm going to go to our facilitator. Thank you so much.
You guys were great. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, we'd like to commend you guys on your hard work. Thank you for this. Good job.
No, thank you all immensely. I will say it was very fun and challenging to go through this process. Thank you so much.
Great.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you so much, judges. You guys asked really good questions.
Thank you, Meredith.
Thank you.